Good evening, class. This is Professor Lorenzo McCoy with you again for another night of reading with the teacher. So, of course, you know how we do it. You're going to follow me as you model how I read. Now, of course, we're all human. Even the teacher makes mistakes. I might read too fast, stumble over some words. These are some nice books to read, but this is my first time going through it. So it's the same with you, class. The first time you read something, it might take a few times. You might have to look up some words and things like that, but you will be fluent because the more you read, the better you will read and comprehend what you are reading. So, do you guys want to start with the narrative text or the informational text? Put a 1 in the chat for narrative text. Put a 2 in the chat. 2 in the chat for the informational one. Okay, the narrative text it is. It's right there on the screen anyway. And the title is Dreadful Fate of Jonathan Yorke. The Dreadful Fate of Jonathan Yorke. The author is Corey Merritt. Now, basically, you can see by looking at the illustration in the front that we're going to be seeing a story about a main character whose name is Jonathan Yorke. And does it look like he's going to have a happy trek through the forest or a scary one? A scary one. This is going to be a scary trek, right? This is not the Red Riding Hood before she met the wolf, where she was playing with the plants and talking to the little animals and things like that. Look at those scary eyes, the things poking out of the dark, peeping at Mr. Jonathan Yorke. So, let's get into it. That's basically summarizes what you pretty much see that we're going to be talking about here. Look at that. Let's look at this illustration right quick. Do you see any happy, colorful flowers? We're looking at fungi, mushrooms, we got algae, we got toadstools in the water. Leap pads for the frogs. We got toads. And some strange creature that looks like it has a lot of eyes on it. I don't know what that is. But let's keep going. It looks like he's about to have a bad time. Jonathan Yorke was lost. Lost in the loathsome gloom of a wilderness he had never experienced before, and had hoped he'd never experience at all. Poor Mr. Yorke. The shortcut through the swamp had seemed like a good idea in the afternoon, but that was when the sun was bright in the late summer sky. Now it was different. The sun was sinking, and the evening shadows had settled in the I have to rewind myself. Sinking, and the evening shadows had settled in like predators seeking out the sick animals in a herd. A toad hopped into the middle of the path and stared at Mr. Yorke with stern golden eyes. Mr. Yorke stopped and stared back. "What have I done to deserve this horrible fate?" he asked the toad. "I've always been such a harmless fellow. Truly I have. I was splendidly behaved as a child and pleasantly well-mannered when I attended Brockleport Community College." He crossed down to the toad's level, and when he spoke again, his voice reached the pitch of an actor in a podunk theater troupe. "So why? Why must a mild person such as me, a humble clerk at the Brockleport General Store, be doomed to wander this accursed swamp?" Look at him looking at the toad. So, what has he been doing so far? What has he been doing? Do we know where he's going yet? Well, let's keep reading and see what we can infer. The toad blinked and hopped into the undergrowth. Mr. Yorke stood and glanced around sheepishly. lost a few hours, and already was talking to the amphibians. It was getting darker, and a steady drizzle was sifting through the canopy. Mr. York shuddered. His chances of finding his way out of the swamp before nightfall seemed slimmer by the minute. Just as the last of the daylight fizzled, he heard something on the path ahead. Footsteps. And judging by the sound, more than one set. What was it that he just heard? I'm going to periodically keep asking you guys questions just to make sure you're keeping up. What was it he just heard? Who was he just talking to in the forest, or the swamp, actually? His neck prickled. He wasn't sure if he should run, hopefully toward the footsteps, or frantically away from them. In the end, he didn't run at all. He simply stayed rooted where he stood, unable to make up his mind as the strangers emerged from the shadows. There were 3 of them, and Mr. York was relieved to see that at least they looked human enough. One was a woman of medium height, clad in a hooded robe. Another was a tall, gangly man with wild hair. The third was odd, to say the least. Mr. York raised his hand in a meager half wave. "Hello, my name is Jonathan York." His voice cracked as he spoke. The hooded woman waved back. "Nice to meet you, Mr. York." Mr. York swallowed. His throat clicked. I don't wish to trouble you, but I'm lost, you see, and I should very much like to find my way out of the swamp before it gets too dark." The lanky fellow shook his head. "No such luck, Mr. York. Your best bet is to spend the night at the Crankerberry Inn and get a fresh start in the morning." "The Crankerberry Inn? Where is that?" "Down the trail a bit," said the hooded woman. "We're heading there now. You're welcome to join us." Mr. York heaved a sigh of relief. He wasn't too keen on staying in some inn with a gaggle of strangers, but it was certainly better than wandering the darkness of an alien swamp. How do you think Mr. York is feeling now compared to how he felt earlier? The party moved onward, walking single file and never speaking. Mr. York plodded along behind them, his head down and his hands jammed in his pockets. The swamp was alive now, with the sounds of its nocturnal denizens. Some noises were familiar: the rasping of katydids, the chorus of tree frogs, the lonesome call of a nightjar. But mixed in were voices Mr. York did not recognize. Guttural groans and shrieks and growls, sinister hisses and gurgles and snarls. He was glad to be traveling with a group. The party stopped abruptly, and the hooded woman pointed to a smaller, overgrown trail snaking off the main path. Through the trees they can see a light. They took the smaller trail and soon found a clearing, in the center of which was a weathered old house. The shingles were cracked and warped, and rain had stripped the paint away years ago. They approached the door, and the hooded woman gave a timid knock. Tuk, 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 tuk. No answer. She knocked again. Tuk, 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 tuk. This time harder. Dum, 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 dum. Still no answer. Finally, after the third knock, dum, there was a shuffling sound, and the door creaked open. Oh. A little old man squinted out at them. He scrunched his face and adjusted the spectacles perched on his nose. He held a lantern, which he thrust forward almost offensively. "Yes?" he asked in a voice as creaky as the door. "What do you want?" The hooded woman, dipped her body in what may have been a curtsy. "We beg your pardon, good sir, but is this not the Cranberry Inn?" The old man scratched or possibly picked the rim of his right nostril. "It is. What of it?" "Well, it's dark and raining, and my fellow travelers and I have no desire to pass through the swamp on a night such as this." Who did they meet at the door just now? And what do you think is going to happen inside this hotel? Do you think it's safe to go in? The old man rolled something between his fingers and flicked it aside. "So it wasn't merely a scratch," thought Mr. York. He tried not to make a face. "And you expect me to give you each a room so you may rest your weary carcasses?" grumbled the old man. "If you please, sir," said the hooded woman. "I don't know. There's been some strange folk on the prowl lately. Nasty folk. Thieves and scoundrels. How am I to know you four won't rob me blind during the night? Perhaps you're even in cahoots with that awful West Bleakport gang." The lanky man was growing impatient. "Are you going to give us a room or not?" Before the old man could give his final word, another voice answered from within the house. "Of course we will." An old lady appeared behind the old man. "And we'll be happy to do so, won't we, Mortimer?" The old man crinkled his face at her. "Seems we will. As long as they pay, that is." Panic swept through Mr. York's scrawny frame. Pay? It suddenly dawned on him that he was not carrying any cash. "Well, what's the price?" he asked. His voice cracked again and he blushed. I don't have much money with me." "Money? What use we have for money? The wife and I have all we need in this house, plus the well for water and the coop for the eggs." "But you said there was a price." There is, the old lady, and it's something each of you can afford. But enough of that now. It's dark, and you don't want to be out in Halfrock Swamp after the dark. "Why?" Mr. York asked before he could stop himself. "What's out there?" The old lady turned to Mr. York with a disturbing gleam in her eye. "Because, young man, Halfrock Swamp is a place of nightmares. There's squeevaleagues, gluttersclogs, and lackadows. There's gingdapods, lactarine manti, and even the all-absorbing slaughterglurk. And that's just the beginning. I won't even mention the horror that dwells on the northeast edge. Now enough of that dreadful talk. Please come into the kitchen for some supper." Now, do you guys think those creatures are real creatures that really exist? Or did they sound made up? Also, if you remember, do they have to pay cash, check, or credit card? Or can you infer what they might have to pay? We don't have that much information, but just guess. What do you think they might need to do? She led them into a cramped kitchen and dished out bowls of lumpy stew. Mr. York might have passed on the meal under normal circumstances, but trudging through the swamp had roused his appetite. The stew tasted strange, but was somehow satisfying. After they finished their dinner, the old man shuffled and took a seat at the head of the table. He lit his pipe and sat puffing with an expression that might have meant contentment or annoyance. It was hard to read a face so scrunched. They sat in uncomfortable silence for what seemed like an hour, but was really no more than 10 minutes. Finally, the old man cleared his throat and spoke. The time has come to collect your payment. Now, as I mentioned, the wife and I have met our needs and therefore have no need or use for material goods. Instead, we ask you pay us in stories. Stories, said the lanky man. Yes, stories. One per guest. We live alone out here in the swamp, and although I don't care much for company, I do enjoy listening to stories, particularly stories of adventure that take me back to my younger days, when I had many stories of my own. Mr. York's stomach churned. Stories? The old man was making them pay with stories? Mr. York feared public speaking almost as much as he feared death and pestilence, and the thought of sharing a story with strangers made cold beads of sweat pop out on his forehead. The old man continued, After you tell your story, I will give you a room key, and you will be allowed to spend the night, understand? The guest nodded blankly. Good. So who's first? Mr. York's heart raced. The prospect of public speaking was upsetting enough, but now a new and nastier thought had revealed itself. He could not think of a story to tell. Nope, nothing. His mind grappled for sustenance, but found nothing. There was not a single event in Mr. York's life worth reciting. Now we know, what did they have to use for payment to be able to spend the night? Also, how do you think Mr. York is feeling? From everything you just heard, how's he feeling about telling the story in front of everyone? The old man scanned the guests. Well, he repeated, who's first? Finally, the hooded woman raised her hand. Mr. York relaxed, grateful that he might have a chance to think of a story. My story is a true one, though I don't tell it often, said the hooded woman. She glanced around the table, avoiding eye contact with the others. It's about a discovery I made in my childhood years. I think I was 10 years old, or 12, though my age doesn't really matter. What does matter is what I learned about the Slenderfeld Ice Cream Company. Look at the pictures. Virginia liked her calico cats and flowers red and gold. She liked her cocoa piping hot and iced tea freezing cold. She liked to sit and watch the clouds, then drift into a dream. But most of all, Virginia loved Slenderfeld's ice cream. Slenderfeld's ice cream, oh yes, a taste that can't be beat. One lick will tantalize your tongue and tingle to your feet. The flavor was a cavalcade of sweet and tangy zest. A symphony inside your mouth. It simply was the best. One day Virginia had an urge to go and promenade down to town and take a tour to see how ice creams mod. Okay, promenade. Now I'm sorry, I was thinking of the French word promenade, means to walk. Promenade, so it must rhyme. In order for it to rhyme with made, it must be promenade. As you see, teachers make mistakes also. So let me One day, Virginia had an urge to go and promenade, which I think it still is promenade, down to town and take a tour to see how ice cream's made. In her head, she saw the scene, big scoops and jumbo spoons, and cheery elves all stirring vats while singing merry tunes. Hi-ho, we're making cookie dough. Look at the pictures. 98% butterscotch, 2% sprinkles. Interesting. They blend and mix that magic goop and swirl it into a paste and serve it up to little pups who then would test the taste. Needs more glycerol monastery. Just a little joke. That sounds like something that would be in something unnatural. Like a food preservative, glycerol, monosterate. Yeah, I think it's a preservative. Look at that. Looks nice. Look at the pictures of the little dogs, little pups. Do you remember the girl's name? Who's singing this rhyme? She reached the gates and rang the bell and asked to please come in. The doors creaked open, and there she saw a fellow weird and thin. Look at that guy. Allow me to introduce myself, said the strange and zany fellow. Do not be skitterous. Don't go squid. No need for turning yellow. My name is Leashkin Slenderfell, and welcome to my keep. It's here where we produce the cream that sets your hearts aleap. Yes, in this factory you will find that mystical dessert that makes Wonka seem like cuttlefish snot and Keebler worse than dirt. That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. Look at that picture. Look at this guy right here. Kaluk praised the nebula. Such suppointness you will sample. It'll blast your taste buds to the next dimension and make your tum-tum ample. Oh, let me in, Virginia begged. I've waited oh so long. Please, oh Mr. Slenderfell, to stall me would be wrong. Of course, my sweet little Peertywink, I'll show you what's in store. You'll soon see how we make the cream. It's all behind this door. What do you guys think is behind that door? Is there anything you might want to see? Oops, let me make sure. The Dreadful Fate of Jonathan York. Okie dokie. That's just a little sample of this book that we're going to read. I thought we'll get the whole read so we can talk about the beginning, the middle, and the end, the conclusion. But I think we have enough to ask a few questions. I asked a few questions in the beginning through the story, but we're going to go over some things. Who is the character, the main character of this story? Write it down or type it in the chat. How many people did the main character meet walking through the swamp? How did they have to pay for their motel night stay if they didn't use money? How did they have to pay? When the hooded woman was speaking and telling her story, what food was she speaking of? What type of creatures did Mr. York speak to when he was walking through the swamp? Did you learn any lessons that you can use in your own life by listening to this story? What made Mr. York feel a little bit better about being in the dark swamp? And do you think what made him feel better would make you feel better also in a situation like that? What did you like most about this story? And what parts of this story would you use in telling your own story? Once we do our final project where we have to do our own stories. What did you like least about this story? What do you think the author could have done better to make this story a better story? Besides us finishing the story, but for the part we already saw, what do you think could have done better? Could have been done better in this book? And next, I'm going to go looking at this illustration right here. Let's go back to some illustrations to see if I can get you to infer some meanings. Okay. Now looking right here, what do you think this character right here, how do you think she feels about the ice cream and going to the ice cream factory? This gave you some brief questions, some literal and some where you have to infer the meaning of and come up to your own conclusions. Now I want you guys to check out the next piece, which is our narrative text. This narrative text is entitled Monster Me, Body Chemistry. And the authors are called Dr. CRISPR. And once we get more into the science, I'll tell you why this CRISPR is spelled this way and what CRISPR means in terms of genetic splicing and things like that. And Pop Labs. Also, when you look at Pop Labs, you might see, those of us that speak Spanish, we might recognize they put the exclamation mark before and after the word. So that's pop. And of course, the first exclamation is upside down, just letting you know that an exclamation is coming. That's what they do in Spanish. So Pop Labs and Dr. CRISPR. And the people that are part of Pop Labs are Stan Cho, David Pupo, Jackie Liu, Bill Jamas, and Young Kim. The summary for this one is basically going to be teaching you a little bit about your body's chemistry. And as you can read up here, we're going to learn about nutrition and sugar through comics. We're going to follow the adventures of Midori and Perla, a cookie monster, and a few friends as they go on an adventure to discover why Perla still feels hungry after eating a big meal. Sorry, it's a little hard to read there because it's very small print on my screen. Okay, let's get into this story. Monster Me Body Chemistry. I'm going to go to my notes also so that I can keep track of the questions I'm giving you guys. Right here. Monster Me. We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let's get into it.